On this episode of The Strange Show, I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Nathan Proctor. Nathan is the Senior Director at the Right to Repair campaign over at PIRG, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization that specializes in public interest issues. Nathan has played an instrumental role in the Right to Repair movement with helping over 5 states pass Right to Repair laws. It's fair to say that the Right to Repair movement wouldn't be the same without Nathan. So I really hope you guys enjoy this conversation. We talk about the most recent Texas Right to Repair laws. We talk about Apple recently releasing iPad parts in order to become compliant with the California Right to Repair laws and many other subjects. Today's sponsor is my company, XiRepair. If you need your electronic device repaired, or if you're looking to just extend the life of your device by maybe getting a battery replaced, check out XiRepair.com. We're a leading cell phone, tablet, computer, and laptop repair provider. We're a WISE certified location, and we've repaired successfully over 40,000 devices since 2018. We would be absolutely honored if you would give us the opportunity to repair your device today. So again, check us out at XiRepair.com. Now, on to my conversation with Nathan. Where have you been? There's been a lot that's a lot that's been going on in the industry over the past few weeks.
Yeah, always something. We're doing a bunch of research right now on compliance, and feel like for some of the marquee brands that have been fighting us the whole way, they know exactly what this law means, and they might have some gamesmanship with their compliance, but they totally understand it. And then there's other companies that are like, what, laws? Haha. So
that's such a great place to start. I know recently the Texas passed the governor has not signed it yet, as far as I'm aware, but they've passed a Right to Repair bill. Do you think the governor is going to sign that? Do you think there will be any pushback?
So in Texas, the governor has like a certain amount of days after the close of session to sign. And if he doesn't get around to it, the bill just goes into effect.
Interesting.
So we have not gotten any indication that there's interest in opposing the bill, but it seems, just reading the tea leaves, that it might be, it might be enacted in that way, which is obviously
interesting. That surprises me because of like the unanimous support behind it from both Republicans and Democrats, right? Like it was like a full, the entire Senate and House voted for it, right?
Yeah, except for when the Senate voted for it, they put a parts pairing restriction in there. And then the House pulled it out. And then when they went to concurrence, that wasn't unanimous. So there was some debate about whether or not it needed to include parts pairing. Obviously, you always like the debates about like, hey, let's make this thing stronger. But that would be the only caveat to saying it was completely unanimous. I would think that there's very strong unanimous support for the basic idea, and then there's oftentimes a little bit of disagreement about some particular details, and in some cases that kind of gets in the way of getting the thing done. And but I think in this case, I think we're going to get it. I think it's going to become law, and that's good news for Texans for sure.
So you mentioned that they didn't include a parts pairing section. Is that correct? Like they removed?
Yeah, they added it in the Senate, and then they removed it in the concurrence.
So I was reading through this bill yesterday in preparation for this, and there was a portion of the bill that I did not understand, which was, I couldn't tell if it was a restriction on, it read something like the requirement for a Wi-Fi connection. Does that mean that that is a requirement or isn't a requirement, or am I reading the wrong portion of the
internet?
That's what it was. So.
The documentation or tool is used by the original manufacturer to only perform at no cost diagnostic services virtually. Is that what you're talking?
I believe so, yeah.
So basically this is an exemption that originally came in California at the request of Garmin makers of smartwatches and GPS devices, they have like a remote tool that can basically access your device through the internet and do a scan, and they didn't want that tool to be made available to a repair shop, as they saw some vulnerability associated with that kind of tool. So I didn't think that, like, as an independent repair shop, you probably I don't know if you feel comfortable with that exemption, but the idea would be that if they have a tool that's like a remote diagnostic tool, that they use and offer for free, then and they don't give it to their authorized service partners. So like we had a list of caveats here. So if you read it, the documentation or tool is used by the original equipment manufacturer to only perform at no cost diagnostic services virtually through the telephone, internet, chat, email, or other similar means that do not involve the manufacturer physically handling the customer's equipment, unless the manufacturer also makes the documentation or tool available to an individual or a business that is unaffiliated with the manufacturer. So it's basically saying, if they do some kind of remote diagnostic for free, they don't have to share that tool, as long as they continue to provide it for free and don't also make it available to some other third party.
That makes sense. Where I was hoping that maybe it was going with the verbiage is, in my mind, us Apple independent repair providers, the repair shops that are actually partnered with Apple, we use what's called GSX. GSX has a MRI tool. That's what Apple calls their like diagnostics tool. And in order to calibrate and serialize a device, you have to have an internet connection. And, although in my repair shop, that's perfectly fine, there have been situations where a customer was frustrated because they did pay the premium to get a genuine screen. And for whatever reason, our internet happened to be out at that particular moment and we couldn't serialize their part. Like, we literally couldn't complete their part. Customer had driven many hours to us, and they're sitting there stuck in our lobby waiting, with no idea when they're going to be able to be released to actually have the repair completed.
Yeah. So, this is something that's involved in the parts pairing reforms, which is in the old version, like if you go back to the right to repair bills that were proposed in like 2016 or something, there was a straight up prohibition on requiring an internet connected process to complete repairs. And we came up with a more narrow restriction around parts pairing in Oregon, in consultation with numerous manufacturers who basically explained why why that was important, and why it would be very, very complicated and expensive for manufacturers to find alternative ways to authenticate certain processes, because they just don't have the databases that can do that on the phone. And if they did, it would be vulnerable to somebody scraping it. And then, there was recently a book that came out that kind of outlined, just the aggressive kind of, fraud that is done, in places like China, where people get a phone that's under warranty and they take out all the original OEM parts and they put in like bubblegum wrappers and stuff and say the phone doesn't work and get a new phone on warranty. And then they just pocket the sale of the parts. And so they have a set of systems. And what we did in Oregon was saying, okay, that technology, there's kind of two advantages to parts pairing. One, if people change parts and try to lie to the manufacturer about it for kind of warranty fraud, they can detect that. And two, if there is any kind of higher performance they can get by using like really sophisticated calibration, in the case of many Apple screens, like basically there's manufacturing differences, like there's drift, or some screens are made to certain specs, where they have like a range of specs and they can make it more precise using the software. So, there's probably a way to explain this. It's a little bit easier, but basically gives you a better display and better touch sensitivity, because if there's variations in the physical parts, you can overcome them with software if you've got precise measurements, and that calibration data is saved, and that's saved not locally. They have to save that, somewhere on the internet. But there's no reason for, if the part is inserted, for it not to work, because the calibration sequence is not approved. And that's what the Oregon parts pairing restriction says. Is if you pull up the Oregon law, it says you can use parts pairing, but you cannot use parts pairing to actively prevent the device from recognizing an otherwise compatible part and having full functionality. And you can't put up misleading and undismissible alerts and warnings about the changing part. And those are the restrictions for parts pairing. So you can have the part check through the internet. You can have it keep a record of the fact that it's a change. The parts have changed, but you can't just say, oh, the serial number on this screen changed. You're not allowed to use your Face ID. You're not allowed to use True Tone. Those are, just automatically restricting those abilities is against the law now.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've never thought about the firmware and databases actually having to be stored on the device as a problem for the manufacturer. So it's fair to critique that argument.
They could build some kind of offline version of it, right? There could be a USB stick that could do it, and maybe that, and maybe in some parts of the country, those restrictions are kind of annoying. But yeah, that is kind of what they're, what way we piece together, they're what they say in public versus what we've actually learned about how the process works and why it's important for them to build this technology in the way that they do it. I mean, it's not only about restricting repair, that is at times just a happy coincidence that they helps them control the market for repairs.
No, that's just downstream effects, Nathan. Come on now. There's no nefarious reasons behind it.
Yeah, it's certainly I view the at times different companies and the whole industry's ambivalence to the fact that people will need to fix these things as nefarious. I'm not giving them a pass on that, but it's more of a sin of omission, I think, in some cases than a strategy to do that.
How do you feel about the Texas bill? Texas is a massive state, but you also had many other states that have passed laws. In your mind, what was some of the wins and what were some of the things maybe you wish were done differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Texas bill was it started off with kind of a more industry friendly template, which was a challenge for us. In one of the earlier versions of the bill, it exempted anything with like a basic power supply, so it would have exempted all basically all electronics. And the sponsors didn't understand why that language was added by why that was the industry language that had been suggested, and I doubt that the industry representatives even knew what it meant. But I was looking at it and I was like, that's, you're exempting everything with a standard power supply, which is kind of everything. The home appliances were exempted, and I just don't see any rationale ever to say that people should not be allowed to fix their dishwashers or refrigerators, or I've sat through the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers testimony on why people should not have documentation and parts to fix clothing dryers. That one notable testimony, their lobbyist at the time, Sarah Pierce, said that it could dismember your children if the dryer latch pops open unexpectedly and your child sticks their arm in. And these are the kind of preposterous things that are being people should be able to fix their appliances like I did with my dad. I don't know, every other weekend it felt like as a kid. My dad was always fixing something for somebody. Yeah, so I was upset about that, but it was interesting. I would say I really enjoyed actually the process of working with some of the leg council in Texas, talking through the exemptions, what they thought of them, and we made some subtle tweaks to make sure that they weren't like they still appear to be loopholes, but if you look at the details, it's actually quite hard for the manufacturers to abuse those in ways that we would find upsetting. Like, for example, there's a standard loophole which Amazon is kind of the driving force of, which says you shouldn't have to offer repair services for anything that you offer a free replacement for. And the purpose of this bill is to enable people to fix things. So we've never liked this exemption. I don't want to encourage thoughtless replacement of stuff. But the way that Texas did is they said, oh, well, what if we just added a thing at the discretion of the owner? And I was like, that is, such a great, change. It's like, oh yeah, you can offer them a free replacement if that's what they want. But if they don't, then you have to help them fix it. And I thought, oh, like, it's kind of, I think they really understood the principle that we were getting at with the bill, which is that, it's our stuff. We should be able to control it. When you buy something, you should own it. And, so I think that working through that bill, like, it's a messier than some of the other states, but also I actually enjoyed the process of working with Representative Gio Capriglione and the staff of the IT caucus there in the Texas legislature. I thought it was a pretty productive, set of meetings that we had, and we're happy to support the final package. I don't necessarily think it's not as strong as some of the bills passed in other states, but obviously it's Texas. It's an enormous market.
Yeah.
It's a big red state with tons of bipartisan support. I think it opens up new opportunities for us. And I think it sends a clear signal to the manufacturers that, if they were thinking that this was only going to be a thing that, West Coast states would do or something, that's not the case. This is something that a really broad swath of people want and is politically viable in just about anywhere. And I think that was really important for us to demonstrate. Like, we've always known that when you get down to the ground, like, people just want to be able to fix stuff, and that it wasn't like a progressive or conservative issue at its core. It was just kind of like transcended those typical political boundaries. But to demonstrate that by, getting a bill across the finish line in a state like Texas is something that I think really puts the money where the mouth is, or, I'm not getting the right turn of phrase, but you know what I'm trying to say.
And that's how I read it too. I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on the compliance side of things, because I was a little disappointed, and maybe I'm thinking about this the wrong way, but a little disappointed that the AG's office is like kind of who handles compliance. That individuals can't seem to sue manufacturers in the state of Texas like they can.
Oh yeah, it's in generally speaking, like, this is that's called private right of action, and that is an extremely difficult thing to get. Manufacturers will probably fight private right of action more so than pretty much any other individual thing that we put in these bills.
But you got it in California, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that was the only state that had.
I don't think so. I think it's AG enforcement in California. I mean, sometimes there are ways in which private lawsuits can be brought, but it's kind of limited. I know I'm pretty sure it's pretty much AG enforcement everywhere. But I will say that there are repair shops who basically just document all their interactions with manufacturers, and when they have complaints, even some that don't live in California are using the California AG's office to just say, where's the firmware? I need the firmware for this product. Like Heiko soldering irons. There's an activist, Stephen Ryan, who, runs kind of a high-end boutique he fixes like CNC machines and other, but he had a soldering iron that broke, and he wanted schematics and firmware. And Heiko was like, "What are you talking about? We don't give that out." And through engaged the California AG and said, "Hey, these are standard materials. We need these." And Eventually, he got what he needed from the company. And then other companies are basically like, starting to be a little bit more aware of, I think, frankly, some of them are surprised by the kinds of repairs that people do.
Yeah, of course.
Because they don't do them at scale. They don't do like micro soldering board repairs at scale, but there are technicians that are doing this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Especially, sometimes they're these kind of specialized installations of products where the value is not necessarily the hardware. It's the fact that it's a whole system. It might be your whole production at a factory, requires this tool to work in this way. And when that tool breaks, it's not just, the cost of the tool. It's like, it's a custom installation. And so you need someone to be able to fix it exactly the way it was. And that requires a higher level of documentation than, maybe companies are used to giving, but we're starting to see more and more of that, which I think is really good.
And support, documentation and support. We had a customer that brought in a Windows 97 machine just a few weeks ago, and they were a small cabinet manufacturer here in Montgomery, Alabama, and they could not manufacture their cabinets without that old machine, without upgrading pretty much all of the mechanical systems that make the cuts and everything else. And
I mean, yeah, there's like naval warships that use Windows XP for that exact reason. Yeah.
Right.
Hospitals, that was how WannaCry. I mean, just, yes, when you have integrated computers into large industrial capital expense equipment, I mean, I think a really common example is like old 486 computers that run HVAC systems, which I've known a lot of people. And then as long as it's not connected to the internet and et cetera, like it's probably going to have the computing power to turn on and off the air and heat and direct those systems forever. But yeah, that happens constantly. There's very old equipment that is doing very expensive jobs.
Yeah. How do you think this changes the relationship, with us and manufacturers? Because like you said, most of these manufacturers aren't doing the hard stuff. And I think the reason is mainly just because of scale, right? And like I don't think Apple necessarily could beat micro soldering in the Genius stores. Like from a cultural perspective, all the way to just a labor perspective, I don't see that happening, right? It's all, if you look at the majority
I think Apple is also just completely, it's hard to compare Apple to anybody else. They have more control over their products and their supply chain than pretty much anybody else, right? But I can tell you, going through all these different appliance companies, they don't even know what is in these products. This is all like on-demand contract manufacturing. So they send an executive to somewhere in China and they say, build this piece of equipment with these basic specifications at this price point, and a factory subcontractor will take the job or they won't. And finally, they'll have someone that takes the job. They may even subcontract it out. The manufacturer may not even know what is in the equipment. So this is especially true in kind of like the legacy manufacturing brands that all kind of, there was this huge move to have this on-demand, just-in-time manufacturing and all this to basically hollow out all of their, like, they just outsourced everything. And so they don't even know what's in this stuff. So when you're like, what's the service manual? And they're like, they struggle to even really understand what they don't have a system in place to, and Apple is obviously different. Apple does not design their products that way, but this is increasingly a problem. And we have to kind of, we're kind of running upstream on this, just, make a bunch of disposable stuff, with this model. And then, if you totally screw something up, just, try to bail it out on the back end. But there's huge consequences to that kind of system, right? Like, there was a massive problem with these fridge compressors that were in LG and Samsung refrigerators, and they were having $5,000-$6,000 refrigerators that were failing after 4 or 5 months. And
I had a tech come out and fix it under warranty.
Yeah, And then they were fixing it. They were replacing the bad compressor with the new bad compressor, and sometimes that would fail again. And then you'd be without a fridge for 2 months because they were super backlogged. And again, this is just a consequence of just taking their eye off the ball. And for a lot of manufacturers, so you'd think, people will, like real estate agents or something, that are like, doing putting new appliances in a place to show it, will be like, well, what appliances should I get? And it's kind of like luck of the draw. It's the Whirlpool, Kenmore, but it's like, maybe that's a good one, maybe it's not. Maybe that same model made by a different contract manufacturer will be a workhorse, and maybe another one will fail. And it's so difficult. The brand on the outside does not correlate, and for many companies, to who built it and to what standards that they built it on. Apple obviously is an example of a company that's not true for, and I think that's why they have their fans out there, because people know what they're getting. I think Right to Repair is a way to put pressure on companies to just pay attention, to mind the store. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's a beneficial thing for consumers to have a wide range of lottery ticket appliances, which may depend, no matter how much you're spending on it, may be an absolute dud. And people should be able to buy good stuff that lasts and can fix when they break, and that's what people want. And we're trying to find a way back towards that.
That's awesome. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit towards the Apple and California's right to repair bills. That one was great, but we saw Apple come out in favor of it. Why do you think that happened? Like, what is the reason for that? It was a big shock to me.
I mean, you'd have to ask them, right? But I think it's because we won. And I think if they could have stopped it, they would have. But we had the votes, we had the support, and I think, to their credit, they were like, okay, well then, all right, let's get with the program. If that's what's going to happen, we'll be on the right side of it. Good for them. I don't think it changes Apple's overall, kind of treatment of their own hardware and the way that they really like to have their control over those things. But they've incorporated repair into it in new and beneficial ways, and they're legitimately doing the things that they said they would do. They're not, if you look at right now, which cell phones you can buy the most OEM spare parts for, like, it's Apple by a mile.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not just that they, said it for the publicity, that they then did it. So to me, I think that they just realized that they had lost that part of the fight, and got with the program. And I think that's to their credit. I think it was the right thing for them to do. And so I'm happy. And then I think, there's many other manufacturers out there who have very different problems than Apple. And so I think that, we have to constantly be paying attention to what people are doing that makes it harder for people to fix stuff. Apple is just so important because it's so important to, it's like, if you as a repair shop couldn't fix like Apple cell phone screens, it would be like, you'd have to totally change your business model. Like, that is the repair that keeps repair shops in the black. So even though it's a focus for, like, there's a lot of people who are invested in that, right to repair is also a much broader thing. So we continue to kind of pay attention to what are the real barriers on the ground to fixing stuff. And some of that is not even manufacturer policy. Sometimes that's, the way that phone insurance works. That's something that we've heard a lot from repair shops. Sometimes it's, consumers are basically led to believe that they're somehow letting somebody else fix it damages their relationship with the manufacturer or their cell phone carrier, like that they're betraying the trust of the manufacturer to go to get it fixed or something. There's a lot of different headwinds that we're trying to deal with in different ways through the right to repair movement. I guess my question for you would be like, have you seen a difference in the way that customers expect repair to go down and expect manufacturers to, honor their choices on repair? Have you noticed, have customers kind of, are they more aware of the benefits and value of the repair now that we've kind of have this, a lot of visibility around the topic?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. We've always taken the approach of being as transparent as possible. And what I mean by that is pre-genuine OEM parts, meaning like pre-Apple and Samsung and Motorola selling genuine parts to us. We would still tell customers, hey, there's an LCD option for your iPhone screen. There's an OLED soft panel screen. You're not going to get as long of a warranty with us with the LCD. We don't recommend it, but we'll put it on there if you want us to. We've always let customers pick and try to be very transparent about what that quality difference is. Or even when OEM pools became, prominent and you could get them on suppliers, we would offer it. So what we've seen is customers, at least in our own store, get excited about having that option, because we see that consumers, if it's the mom and she's a working mom, a nurse, she might want the genuine part just because she's using her phone on a regular basis and it's the newest iPhone 16 Plus or whatever. She's willing to spend the money and it makes sense. But for her daughter, who's got an iPhone 11, she's going to get that aftermarket screen just because it's financially affordable. And so, I have seen a more educated customer, and we're also seeing second, third, and fourth generation customers, people that got an iPhone 4 or 5C fix with us, that now they're getting 15s and 14s fixed. And so they're aware of these differences. They're aware that genuine parts are available. And in some cases, they know the value proposition for them and when it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's probably similar to like people who drive cars and have an independent mechanic that they go to. It's like, when I had an old beater Subaru, and when it broke a strut on it, that was funny driving down the street like the mechanic's like, it was kind of on its last leg. It's like, yeah, we could try to get something from the junkyard from another car. You go aftermarket and go OEM, but it's going to be $700 just for the part. And and you're aware that you've got a vehicle with whatever 160,000 miles, and the head gasket is probably going to go at some point, because that happens on a lot of old Subarus. That choice is something that like people like, that's a normal thing for a product owner to do. And having that range, I think, is important for the customer. And then I think to some manufacturers that gives them the heebie-jeebies, just the idea that people are making those kind of choices. But they need to get over that. They sold the thing.
Oh, absolutely. And the better way to say it is like the customer bought the thing, right? They have that choice. And in some cases, it's silly to act like aftermarket parts aren't better. I mean, if you look in the auto world, there are some aftermarket parts that are better. Even I would argue some of the older iPhone batteries that are aftermarket are as good, if not better, than genuine, just because you can get ones that have larger capacity and they were able to perfect it multiple years after the device came out.
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% true. And we see that in other industries, right? Like medical devices. There was a set of infusion pumps that had a faulty thing. And then so whenever there was an independent service organization that was, it was one of the things that they fixed, they would just replace, there were these faulty valves that were going bad everywhere. They would just replace them routinely with an aftermarket part every single time one came through, because the OEM part was faulty. And so they had much lower failure rates for these pumps than when the OEMs were fixing them, because the OEMs were putting in their, and another example is like, I don't know if you were in business, like when the 6 Plus, where people getting the gray bar of death, and that was there was other issues where there was a way to like microsolder a little extra give on one of the connectors that was breaking, due to the flex of the device, because the phone is kind of big, and so it was flexing and it was popping a connector off. And the OEM didn't, but the aftermarket people were just like putting a little extra wire there, so it had a little give, and it wouldn't happen again. A really funny example from my recent research was I was talking to a U.S. military operator, and he trained people on how to use these drones, and they look kind of like remote controlled airplanes, but they were these little reconnaissance drones, and they're designed to crash land. And then oftentimes after they crash land, they wouldn't start up. And so the manufacturer required them to ship them back to the U.S. to their repair depots at a cost of $26,000 a piece. And eventually they had so many that they were waiting for, they couldn't do their training programs. So they got, basically temporary permission to attempt to fix it. Turns out that there was a connector between the main, motherboard in the device and the rest of the unit. And it wasn't even, there was no retaining clip. So it was just popping off when it landed. And then the thing would act like it was dead, but it was just literally putting this thing back on. So they would put it back on, and then they would put a dab of hot glue. That was literally the thing the guy said, to keep it from popping off again. And then the things would work. Not only did that save, $26,000 to the American taxpayers every single time they did it, it was a more resilient design choice, right? It made the actual product more operational. It's really interesting how this used to be how companies would make their products. Like, they would literally consult with people. Willie Cade, who you probably met, is an activist on Right to Repair. His grandfather has hundreds of patents with John Deere, and what he would do, he has all these notebooks. You can find this stuff. His name was Theo Brown. He would go out to the field and have people using his inventions, his John Deere augers and things, to do all kinds of farming. He would find out what they would do, what adjustments they would make to the equipment, or what they're like, oh, I'm worried about losing my finger in this thing, so I just bolted on a little guard here. And he would just incorporate that into the next, that was part of the design process, was interacting with the people who were fixing, who were modifying, who were like, yeah, this thing stinks in rocky soil. Like, what can we do to make this thing work in rocky soil better? And they would have to puzzle that out. And I feel like we've moved to this model where manufacturers act like they're these anointed poet kings, and we all just have to, take their, but repair shops are fixing problems that the manufacturer puts in these products in order for customers to have a better experience. And that's good for the manufacturer. It's good for the customer, improves their brand experience. And, I think we need to get back to embracing that.
I couldn't agree more. You asked earlier about how the customer interaction has changed. The thing that shocked me the most is how the OEM interaction has changed. It's different for each one, but I'll tell you, I was in Cupertino at Apple's headquarters in 2024 at a CTIA event, and that's where they announced privately the update that was coming that would allow you to calibrate used parts. And I'll never forget, I was so shocked watching a guy named Avi, who is basically below Brian, the VP of Apple Care over there, giving this presentation. And when it got to the Q&A part, he would want to answer the questions, and the Apple execs would just be in the back of the room interrupting, saying, sorry, we can't answer that. Sorry, we can't talk to you right now. And so it was like my entire interaction with Apple is almost summed up by the people that are doing the work, that are moving the needle, that are just baseline employees. They are, for the most part, pretty good people that are actually pro repair and understand the e-waste problem and want to make change. But it's been corporate, the higher ups, that have come in a lot of times and say no, sorry, we're not doing that. That's crazy.
I mean, that's my experience with any company ever.
Sure.
It's just a collection of, people with a series of motivations. I think the more you've completely given over your thought process to, what benefits the shareholders in the next quarter, you're just going to end up doing things that are bad. But that's not a natural human inclination. So the people who are doing, people have much more sophisticated sense of right and wrong, then, well, that'll make more money for the shareholders next quarter. And I mean, I think that that's endemic thinking. And it's really short term, because a lot of these things are like, you know, if you look at even the way that Apple has handled like the Epic lawsuit, you know, it's, you know, they're almost like begging enforcers to like take their ability to govern their own products away from them, because they refuse to make reasonable, you know, accommodations to like obvious, like to illegal practices. And they refuse to recognize the rights of those laws to exist. And I think that's like, I don't like, when I look at what John Deere is doing in their lawsuits, I'm like, this is not a sustainable strategy. Like, you know, maybe it makes sense for next quarter to like not like deal with you know, like a legal problem with the way that you constructed your business model. But sometimes that's a really hard message to get through, and it takes a lot of people trying to steer the ship away from those things. And I that's my experience with Apple, but that's my experience with basically all of these companies. Like, there are people within all these companies who like legitimately want to make delightful products that do the things that people want them to do. And there's other people who like do not care about what people's experience is, as long as the number goes up.
Absolutely. Where I was going that more so is that the one thing that is consistent, unfortunately, among a lot of them is the relationship of how they see independence. You know, the verbiage has changed from, you know, unauthorized repair to third-party repair to now it's independent repair. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of people that do see us as not a partner. And it's unfortunate, because if you look at the auto repair world, 80% of out of warranty jobs are done by independent auto repair mechanics in the US, according to the Auto Care Association. And I think that's probably pretty similar in our industry as well for the electronics, because I know for a fact most customers are not going to pay $300 and something for an iPhone screen that's over a year or two old. And so it's unfortunate that they see it like that, because there would be nothing that would make me happier than having Apple ask for my opinion, or at minimum, when I've been in private meetings with them, not get irritated when I say, hey, why can we not return parts that are bad? You know, I'm not sure if you're aware, but as an Apple IRP member, our contract says we're not allowed to resell these parts, meaning if we don't use them, technically we're not supposed to resell them on eBay or move them out of our supply. And secondly, if we have an issue, you have like a 1% cap on every so many thousands of dollars of parts that you can actually send back. But the issue is the majority of IRPs are not, you know, tech depots, and so we never qualify for that metric, right? Sending one back would be like, you know, in a percentage terms, 20% or whatever of the genuine parts we did that month, so we can't send it back. And that's a huge burden, because these are $200 and $300 parts a lot of the time. And so if you have some kind of warranty, you're just kind of stuck with that as a independent shop, which ruins your profit from 4 or 5 different repairs. And when that was brought up in private meetings, I mean, it was almost laughed at. Like, oh, that's an issue. It's like, yeah, we're not $1 trillion company, man. Like, you're kind of an asshole to even like have that kind of mindset about this, or not understand that I'm asking you on behalf of independents that this should be a policy that's reconsidered, especially if you want us to use these parts, because it's not just a cost factor. It's you know, if I'm using a Mobile Centrics or an Intergadgets or another independent supplier in our industry, they have a lifetime warranty on these parts. And so if there's an issue, I can send it back. It's a very easy process. In shipping, I'm probably sending a few other parts back to them. It just makes sense. But with these OEMs, it's not that case.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be a difference in the market, and the key thing is that we protect that option, right? I think you know, sometimes, you know, that kind of after the quality and the availability and the price of the aftermarket parts can range. And that obviously is super, you know, volatile for a company like a small repair shop like yours. So that's something that, you know, you want some steadiness. But the competition is the only solution that I can see, is that like Apple wants to sell if Apple doesn't care about selling these parts, if they want to if they don't want to compete on the quality of their product to the repair shop, if they have defective parts that they won't warranty, to smaller operators, and other people are selling parts that they will stand behind, and they start to lose business because of that. Like, that's the nature of the beast. And maybe that's not something that they want to change, but as long as there's options for repair shops, like, if they want the prices to be competitive, if they want, I mean, it's one of those things. Like, some of their prices, like, obviously we've all seen the prices for some of the iPad parts are, I mean, compared to the aftermarket, they're just not, like, I can't imagine what you, in a situation where you would pay $250 for a charge port when the aftermarket's like $18. You're not going to have, if it either works or it doesn't. And you know.
So that's a great segue about the Apple iPad parts. So I did a write up on that. 38% of the parts are more than 50, with an average like $75 labor rate attached to it, causes that repair to be more than 50% of the cost of the replacement device. You brought up the charging port on the iPad 13 Pro, 4th generation, I believe. It's like 15 or 18 bucks on suppliers like MS, who also supply the genuine, for now $250. It's very clear to me, unless Apple wants to release a press release and prove me wrong and show why, that they're not actually selling these for what it costs to manufacture. Because an iPad 11 would cost $1,000 to manufacture it, or to buy these parts through Apple's self-service portal, and then try to rebuild it. And that doesn't even include the motherboard, right? So it's almost like they've picked an arbitrary number, which is like, let's keep it around 50% of the cost of the device for every single one of these parts, no matter what it is, because that's pretty much where you land when you add your labor rates to it. And that's just insane to me. And it's kind of sad, quite frankly. What were your thoughts on the iPad parts when they were released?
I mean, I don't think Apple, regrettably, ever really considered repair of iPads a thing that people should do. Which, I mean, what was the number? I was looking at this the other day, because we were looking at tablets, and it's not like nobody fixes tablets, right? The Microsoft Surface Pro, they have repair manuals. They sell dozens of spare parts. The Galaxy Tabs S9, we counted 95 different parts in their repair store. They have full service support. I mean, there's definitely other tablets that don't do many repairs, but there's many that do. And
it's unfortunate.
I think they're just behind. I mean, I think that I don't necessarily view the prices and the offerings in their first go round of support as the kind of where this is going to end up. I mean, look at what it was like for when they first started doing those self repair things, and they'd mail you 80 pounds of tools, it's clear that they don't have the they're building the systems as they're kind of going. And so I mean, part of me is like, okay, first attempt, we're getting started on this thing. This is, there's reasons why this needs to get better, but I'm not quite like, it's their first push towards, okay, people are going to be fixing these now. I think we're going to start seeing better design for repairability on these products as they have to think about writing repair guides for them. Someone's going to say, like, hey, if you just put a bracket there, then we don't have to ship a 18-pound jig to somebody to take this thing apart.
That's $1,400 just for the yeah. I wrote a blog post about this. I thought my thoughts from the iPad parts coming out is less about the affordability, because the reality is the vast majority of consumers are not going to choose it. We're going to offer it. It's probably going to be the customer has to essentially pre-order for it, and we'll purchase it and get it shipped, but probably won't stock very many Apple parts. We'll offer it. Customers are not going to choose it. I mean, it just does not logically make sense. The iPad 11 screen alone, before installation is more expensive than what we currently charge for a near premium OEM copy screen with labor. I mean, that just doesn't make sense economically for customers. And so Apple has taken the economic viability away from the majority of their parts, and I would argue that's possibly on purpose. Where I'm going with this is what I've taken mainly as a win for our industry is, one, this is the first time that a right to repair law has forced Apple to actually fix something that they didn't fix already, or at least offer in their authorized network. And two, I thought it was a huge win because I had numerous conversations in Cupertino and in previous meetings asking them for these parts as an IRP member. And I was told, quote, "We do not fix iPads. When they die, they are trash." That is an exact quote from the people, at least the specific person that I'm quoting from Apple. And unfortunately, you're right. That's the way they saw it. And so my point is, I think now that these parts are here, we saw that Apple put on their website that you can now make service appointments for iPads, and you can select, screens and batteries just like you could for iPhones and iMacs. Now, whether you can actually get that fixed same day in-house, it's yet to be seen. But I think customers are going to start seeing, hey, wait a second. I can go down the street to XiRepair and, get my iPad fixed same day with a genuine part. Why can't you guys? And it's kind of this inflection moment as an industry, because for the past 10 years, we have all the iPad technicians. We've been fixing them.
It's exactly right. I mean, it just, to me, it's reminiscent of like the first, there was Brian Chen, who's a columnist in the New York Times, ordered the the giant 80-pound Pelican case to fix his iPhone. And then, if they were thinking, hey, we'll give you what you need to fix these things, and no one will want to do it. But of course, that's not what happened. People are immediately comparing it to, hey, when I need this exact, there's a competing product to this, and it's an iFixit kit, and it comes with all the tools you need, and it comes in a box like this,
and you don't have to return it.
And the guides are better. The success rate is they have a warranty on it. And, you realize that, like, as soon as they actually have to compete with these services, it's just natural. Like, they have pride in what they do. This is going to get better. And I think it's very healthy for these things to open up. And I think the more they think about iPad repair, the better. Like, I don't know. I've heard this from a lot of repair shops that, like, when the pandemic hit, they got like a bunch of repair shops were telling me, especially after the stimulus checks came out, people were coming in with like a pile of like old devices, and they needed stuff for their kids to go to their Zoom classes or whatever. They needed more devices at home to do video stuff. And there was just a ton of like first generation like iPads that they were fixing. And like, these repair kind of helps the resilience. And there's a lot going on in the world, and we might really need these repairs coming up if there's continued supply chain issues, if there's continued geopolitical storms. Like, let's be smart about this. So it all seems like progress to me.
You're absolutely right. It is progress, and we were being hard on Apple, but it's definitely progress. I mean, even with the charging port analogy, yeah, it's $250, but when we've asked for charging ports for iPhones, we were told, unfortunately, those are never repaired, so we're not going to offer the parts, and they're too invasive of a repair to offer, even though you and me both know that's not a true statement. But now we have them, so there's almost this question of, will the iPhone 17 have charging ports when it's released inside of the IRP program? Yeah, another win is definitely the guides. You talked a little bit about that, and Apple's old guides were definitely terrible. But if you've seen the iPad guides, I would argue that they had a huge improvement. They've got videos, and they've documented it really well, and it's like a consumer-friendly way. And one of my complaints as a business owner is in our, we use Repair Desk, our POS system. We have a system that essentially links the repair guide for whatever repair that our employees and technicians are doing. but I couldn't link Apple genuine repairs because even though we had access to them internally, there was nothing I could link to. You had to go sign into GSX. There was no public link that could just my technician open up. Now, at least with the newer devices that are publicly available, that just pops up. And so it solved kind of a quality issue inside of my own business, which is now I have the official guide as soon as the device comes out. And so my technicians aren't guessing how this looks if there's not a YouTube or iFixit guide available. And I think that's a big win.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and I think, you know, it's one thing for Apple, right? Because it's, you know, they make like, you know, a couple new versions of their product lines a year. They're not making 15 new phones a year. But you know, the market segmentation for, you know, after you get through like, you know, Apple and Samsung is like, you know, it's like this massive array of manufacturers. And if we can, if they're all have a quality guide and it's required and there's some consistency in how you access them, you know, that just makes it practical for a repair shop when somebody brings something in to be like, let's open it up. Like, we can order parts. We can, you know, what is available from the manufacturer. Like, you know, to me, that's like a big part of it. Like every single time you think about what gets fixed and what doesn't, a lot of it is, you know, what the community has made available. And because Apple had so few products, like iFixit or whatever was able to replicate a lot of what they weren't providing. But that's just not the case for, you know, for other manufacturers and other industries, where there's just a lot more different products out there. And if the manufacturers won't help you, you know, it's just not enough staff at iFixit to write a guide for all 12,000 of those. So
very true. It's a great segue for compliance. I'd love to give you a few examples of ways that I think that these companies, big companies, are not compliant, and then kind of give me your thoughts on how you think we could bring them into compliance, or if there's anything we can even do about it. So I know first on the new iPads, as an IRP member, we have access to power buttons, speakers, two items and repair parts that are not currently available on the self-service portal. I would assume that would mean they're not compliant because they're offering the authorized networks parts that they're not offering consumers. And although I benefit as a repair shop from that being the case, I don't think legally it should be, or morally. Another example is obviously iPads are now selling charging ports. So what's the argument as to why the iPhone isn't? They're not soldered on. So the soldering argument can't be made. There are flex cables too. And that was Apple. I think with Samsung, you know, they're non-compliant across the board because there's very few, if any, publicly available service guides that I'm aware of. We have access to them, but it's through this like super proprietary, you have to go through 3 different two-factor authentication logins to get to it. I mean, it takes 30 minutes to find an actual Samsung repair guide. And by that point, you could have just fixed the device. Also parts, right? There's no self-service Samsung portal. And even for us ISP members, we essentially don't use the program because it's such a pain in the butt to actually get something shipped to you. I mean, I'll give you this. I don't know if you're aware. If I buy a Samsung part through Samsung's GSPN website, which is what all their tech depots and Asurion stores buy their parts from, I don't get a tracking number when I buy something. And their customer support is an email that takes 2 or 3 days to get back. And worse, unlike iPhone, there's 15 million different models, not only, you know, variants, but like if you have an S10, there's not just an S10, there's an S10 US, there's an S10 US Verizon, there's an S10 US T-Mobile. And so that compatibility is not super clear. They want you to check it based on serial number, but if the device doesn't turn on, some of the models are not, the serial numbers are not printed on the back of it. So you know, their entire service model is just broken. Whether you're looking at it from a part perspective, the service guides perspective, or even the tools being available, we don't use it.
I just shared you on the version of the repair. So, because I just was checking, we come back and check to see what manufacturers are providing. Sometimes we don't know if there's another manual out there that's actually the real manual, and they have a smokescreen manual. So I just shared you on one. I do have to hop to another thing. I think you should document every single case of these and put it in the repair a complaint collector from repair.org, and we can raise these with the companies, and if they want to address them, we can talk to the attorneys general. So far, we haven't had to file lawsuits to get what we need from companies, because to the extent that there's a dispute, usually when the AG says, no, you got to do it, companies that just hand it over. It may require somebody asking them, and that's what we need repair shops to do. Just flag issues that you see. If you think it should be better, make a complaint. We'll go and argue with the companies until it gets better. I think this is going to be an iterative process where we slowly just slowly get, I mean, they have to build all these systems. They may not be thinking about it. I don't necessarily think of it as, kind of their evil intents. It's just, we got to push them. It's kind of like dragging your kids to do their homework or whatever. Takes a little bit of arm twisting.
If I could, real quick, one last question for you. I told people I was going to be doing this interview, and I had many people ask me to ask about the third-party repair ads being banned on Google. I know you guys.
Oh, yeah, we got. I can't talk about that right now, but we're fixing it. We got something. We got
interesting.
We're I fix it. Well, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I can't talk about this. I don't know what I could say publicly. Please delete all this. We issued a public call for Google to fix this. We put some, I think that they care about it. I think that we're working on trying to figure out a way forward. I think we'll be able to solve this.
What can repair shops do? I think that's really what people are wanting to ask. Like, what can repair shops do to get involved? Because right now you've got a campaign.
All of this is basically done by repair.org, which is like a volunteer-led organization. If you're not giving the, like, whatever it is,
I think it's $50 a month right now. Or
$50 a month to help have an advocate who's fighting for you. Like, that's what it takes. Like, I mean, you need a cop on the beat. That's what that's what repair.org can do, and that's who organizes these efforts to kind of deal with problems like, hey, we can't do advertising. They're the convening force, and yeah, like, if you want to have an advocate, then you gotta organize the money a little bit, and to me, I think that we can deal with problems like this, and we put a lot of pressure on Google over the years to deal with this, and I think we might be able to solve it. I do think it's going to take something like an empowered repair.org in order to kind of get it over the finish line, because somebody needs to be able to organize the shops to prove that they're real shops, and to get them authenticated in such a way that prevents Google from having to deal with all the spam. There were these, I don't know if you knew this, there were these scams where people would say it's a mail-in repair service, and then they would just steal your product. And so they need a way to authenticate. That's complicated. Repair.org could be the way that we get that done, but they're going to need a little bit of help and support to do that.
Thanks for doing this, Nathan. I really appreciate your time. I could talk to you about hours for anything right to repair.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll see each other
around.
Yeah. All right. I got to run.
Thanks, Nathan.
Talk to you soon. Bye.